I jolt awake in a cold sweat, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I frantically glance at the digital clock on my bedside table. It's 3:15 a.m. I'm drenched in sweat, and my breath is coming in ragged gasps. Moments ago, I was trapped in a nightmare. A rotting corpse was hunched over me, its bony fingers digging into my stomach. I could feel the cold, slimy touch of its skin against mine. I screamed in terror, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. As I lay there, paralyzed with fear, I suddenly realized it was just a dream. I let out a gasp of relief, but as I did, I glanced at the clock again. It was 3:14 a.m. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I knew that couldn't be right. The nightmare had lasted only a few seconds. How could it have taken up an entire minute? As I sat there, my mind racing, I heard a faint creak coming from the closet. I slowly turned my head, my eyes wide with fear. The door was slightly ajar, as if something was trying to get out. My heart was pounding in my throat. I wanted to get out of bed and investigate, but I was too terrified to move. I knew that if I opened that door, something unspeakable would be waiting for me. I closed my eyes and tried to convince myself it was all just my imagination. But the creaking sound grew louder, and I could hear something shuffling around inside the closet. I couldn't take it anymore. I leapt out of bed and ran to the door, flinging it open. But there was nothing there. The closet was empty. I stood there, panting heavily, my body trembling. I felt like I was going insane. I knew I had heard something, but there was no explanation for it. I got back into bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dream and the creaking door. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. As the night wore on, the creaking sound started again, this time coming from under my bed. I pulled the covers up over my head, but I couldn't block out the noise. I could feel something moving under the bed, scratching against the floor. I could hear it breathing, shallow and raspy. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. I knew that if I moved, whatever was under my bed would get me. Suddenly, the breathing stopped. I held my breath, terrified to move. But then, something cold and slimy touched my foot. I screamed and kicked at whatever was touching me, but it wouldn't let go. I could feel its claws digging into my skin, and I knew it was going to pull me under. I screamed again and again, but no one came to my aid. I was trapped, alone in the darkness, with something unspeakable lurking beneath my bed. I woke up the next morning, drenched in sweat and shaking with fear. I looked at the clock. It was 3:15 a.m. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was a dream or something real. But I do know one thing. I'll never be able to look at a clock at 3:15 a.m. the same way again. It was a typical Tuesday evening when it happened. I was lying on the couch, absently flipping through channels on the TV while my cat, Luna, roamed the apartment. She was a peculiar cat, to say the least, curious about almost everything, yet she had an unspoken rule: she never went near the closet in my bedroom. I had always found it odd. Luna would eagerly explore every nook and cranny of our home, but the moment she was near that closet door, she'd hiss and back away, her fur standing on end. I'd chalked it up to her quirky feline instincts, and never gave it much thought. That is, until the day she broke her own rule. It started with an eerie silence that filled the apartment. Luna was usually quite vocal, her meows a constant background noise. But that evening, there was nothing. I called her name, expecting her to emerge from one of her many hiding spots, but there was no response. Panic began to set in as I scoured every room, and it wasn't long before I found myself standing in front of that dreaded closet. The door was slightly ajar. My heart pounded in my chest as I nudged it open further. The closet was pitch black, and I had to squint to see anything. That's when I noticed her, Luna, sitting perfectly still at the back of the closet. Relief washed over me as I reached out to grab her, but the moment my hand touched her fur, she bolted out of the closet and disappeared into the apartment. I was about to follow her when I felt it, a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder. I turned around so quickly I nearly lost my balance, but there was no one there. Just the empty closet. My heart raced as I shut the door tightly and hurried back to the living room. Luna was nowhere to be found. I searched for hours that night, but she had vanished without a trace. The apartment felt different, colder, darker, as if the very air had changed. The next few days were a blur of worry and sleepless nights. I put up missing cat posters and asked neighbors if they had seen her, but it was as if she had never existed. The apartment, once a place of comfort, had become a place of dread. I avoided the closet at all costs, but the unease was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. One night, about a week after Luna's disappearance, I awoke to the sound of scratching. It was faint but persistent, coming from the direction of the closet. My heart pounded as I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and I knew I had to investigate. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept towards the closet with a flashlight in hand. The door was closed, but the scratching continued. With trembling hands, I opened it slowly, shining the flashlight into the darkness. The scratching stopped abruptly, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from the depths of the closet, I heard it, a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Help me!" The voice was faint but desperate, and it sent chills down my spine. I took a step back, my mind racing. Was it Luna? Was she somehow trapped in some hidden compartment? I leaned closer, trying to listen, but the voice had gone silent. Determined to uncover the truth, I began to pull out everything from the closet, clothes, boxes, old shoes, until it was completely empty. But there was nothing. No hidden door, no secret compartment. Just an empty closet and an overwhelming sense of dread. I stood there, flashlight in hand, trying to make sense of what had just happened when I felt it again, that cold, clammy hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but once again, there was no one there. Exhausted and terrified, I decided to sleep on the couch that night. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak, every shadow seemed menacing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hours dragged on, and just as I was about to drift off, I heard it, the whispering. It was coming from the closet, but this time, it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus of whispers, overlapping and echoing, filling the room with an eerie, otherworldly sound. "Help us!" The voices were pleading, desperate, and I could feel their pain. My heart ached with fear and sadness, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't ignore their cries for help. Gathering my courage, I approached the closet once more. The whispers grew louder as I got closer, and when I opened the door, the flashlight flickered and died. Plunged into darkness, I fumbled for my phone, using its weak light to guide me. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into wails. I reached out, feeling my way through the darkness, and my hand brushed against something solid. It was a small, ornate box, hidden in the back of the closet. I pulled it out, and the wails ceased instantly. With trembling hands I opened the box. Inside were old, faded photographs and a diary. The photos were of a family, a mother, father, and a little girl with a cat that looked eerily like Luna. The diary belonged to the little girl, and as I read through it, a horrifying story unfolded. The family had lived in this apartment decades ago. The little girl had a cat named Whiskers, who, like Luna, had a peculiar aversion to the closet. One day, Whiskers had ventured inside and never came out. The family searched everywhere, but the cat was never found. Soon after, the little girl began hearing whispers and seeing shadows. The diary ended abruptly, with the little girl writing about a cold, clammy hand that would touch her shoulder at night. Chills ran down my spine as I closed the diary. The whispers had returned, softer now, almost grateful. I knew what I had to do. Taking the box, I left the apartment and walked to the nearest park. Under the moonlight, I buried the box, saying a silent prayer for the lost souls. When I returned home, the atmosphere had changed. The air felt lighter, the darkness less oppressive. I called out for Luna, and to my astonishment, she emerged from under the bed, her eyes wide and her fur standing on end. She looked at me, then at the closet, and I knew she had sensed the change too. From that day on, Luna never went near the closet again, and neither did I. The whispers were gone, and the apartment slowly returned to its old, comforting self. But the memory of that night, of the cold, clammy hand and the desperate whispers stayed with me. I had uncovered a dark secret, and in doing so, had set free the spirits trapped within. The closet remains closed, a silent testament to the horrors that once lingered there. Luna and I have moved on, but every now and then, I catch her staring at the closet door, her eyes filled with a wisdom that transcends her feline nature. And in those moments, I am reminded of the power of the unseen, and the fragile boundary between our world and the next. I had just moved into this old Victorian house a week ago. The place was a bargain, and though it needed some work, I couldn't resist the charm of its high ceilings, intricate woodwork, and antique fixtures. The first few nights were uneventful, just the usual creaks and groans of an aging house settling in. But tonight felt different. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and opened the door. There was no one there. I leaned out, peering down the dimly lit hallway, but it was empty. I shrugged and closed the door, chalking it up to my imagination. As I returned to my book, a cold chill washed over me. I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the closet door. It was slightly ajar, just as it had been when I moved in. I had yet to put anything in there, feeling an irrational discomfort whenever I got too close. Something inside me whispered that I should keep it closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was different. Ignoring the nagging sensation, I approached the closet. I took a deep breath and reached for the handle, but before I could touch it, the door swung open on its own. I stumbled back, heart pounding in my chest. The closet was empty, save for an old, dusty mirror leaning against the back wall. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped closer, examining the mirror. It was ornate, with a gold frame that looked like it belonged in a museum. I wiped away the dust, my reflection staring back at me. But something was off. My reflection seemed distorted, like a funhouse mirror. I turned away, trying to shake off the unease. As I did, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped around, but the mirror was empty. I laughed nervously, convincing myself that it was just a trick of the light. I closed the closet door, making sure it was firmly shut this time. I settled back into my chair, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I tried to focus on my book, but my eyes kept drifting back to the closet. I decided to call it a night, and headed upstairs to my bedroom. As I climbed into bed, the house seemed to grow quieter, the silence pressing in on me. I closed my eyes, willing myself to fall asleep. But just as I was drifting off, I heard a faint whisper. My eyes snapped open, and I listened intently. The whisper came again, barely audible, but unmistakable. It seemed to be coming from the closet. I threw off the covers and crept downstairs, my heart pounding in my ears. The whisper grew louder as I approached the closet, now a low, guttural voice. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking. I hesitated, but the voice grew more insistent, almost begging me to open the door. I took a deep breath and yanked the door open. The mirror was gone. In its place was a dark, gaping void. I stepped back in shock, but something in the darkness reached out, grabbing my arm and pulling me in. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the void. I found myself in a dimly lit room, the air heavy with the scent of decay. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of myself. Some were twisted and monstrous, others looked terrified, just as I felt. The voice echoed around me, now a chorus of whispers, all urging me to find the key. I stumbled through the room, searching for any sign of a key. My reflection in each mirror seemed to mock me, their eyes filled with malice. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and spun around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and I knew I had to find the key before it was too late. I spotted a small, ornate box on a pedestal in the center of the room. I approached it cautiously, my eyes darting to the mirrors, half expecting one of my reflections to step out and stop me. I opened the box, and inside was an old, rusty key. I grabbed it, and the whispers fell silent. I looked around, searching for a way out. The mirrors seemed to close in on me, their surfaces rippling like water. I spotted a door I hadn't noticed before, hidden in the shadows. I rushed to it, the key fitting perfectly in the lock. I turned the key, and the door swung open, revealing a blinding light. I stepped through, and the light enveloped me, pulling me back into the real world. I stumbled out of the closet, gasping for breath, the door slamming shut behind me. I leaned against the wall, my heart racing. The house was silent once more, but the feeling of being watched remained. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I packed my things and left that night, vowing never to return. Years later, I still think about that night. I've tried to research the history of the house, but there's no record of anything unusual. I can't explain what happened, but I know one thing for certain: some things are better left alone. I was lounging in my room, scrolling through my phone and listening to the distant hum of the television from the living room downstairs. My mom was in the kitchen, as usual, preparing dinner. The comforting aroma of her signature lasagna wafted up the staircase, making my mouth water. It was a scene of domestic tranquility, the kind you'd see in a wholesome family sitcom. But that evening was about to take a dark twist. "Jenna!" My mom's voice called from the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready. Can you come down and set the table?" I groaned, not because I didn't want to help, but because I was engrossed in a particularly captivating article about urban legends. Reluctantly, I pushed myself off the bed and started towards the stairs. As I was about to descend, I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible whisper coming from the closet at the end of the hallway. "Don't go down there, honey." I heard it too. A chill ran down my spine, freezing me in my tracks. I turned slowly, my eyes fixed on the closet door. It was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness within. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it my dad playing a prank? But he was out of town for a business trip. Maybe it was my little brother? But he was at a friend's house for a sleepover. "Mom?" I called out hesitantly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you say something?" There was no reply from the kitchen, only the clinking of pots and pans. The whisper had been so clear, so distinct, that it couldn't have been my imagination. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer to the closet, my heart pounding in my chest. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each step amplifying my growing dread. I reached out a trembling hand and pushed the closet door open wider. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from the hallway, creating an impenetrable void. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement, but all I heard was the deafening silence. "Jenna!" My mom called again, her voice sounding more urgent this time. I took a deep breath and forced myself to turn away from the closet. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild. I descended the stairs, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me like a second skin. When I reached the kitchen, my mom was standing by the stove, her back to me. She didn't turn around when I entered, which was unusual. My mom was always the type to greet me with a warm smile and a hug, especially when she knew I was feeling anxious. "Mom?" I said cautiously, stepping closer. "Is everything okay?" She didn't respond. Instead, she continued to stir a pot on the stove, her movements slow and deliberate. A sense of foreboding settled over me, and I hesitated, glancing around the kitchen. Everything seemed normal. The table was set, the lasagna was in the oven, and the radio was playing softly in the background. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the atmosphere was wrong, like the air was charged with an invisible tension. I took another step forward, my eyes never leaving my mom's back. "Mom!" I said again, louder this time. "I heard something upstairs." It sounded like a whisper. She finally turned around, and my heart skipped a beat. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she pointed towards the hallway, her hand trembling. "Jenna," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to leave. Now." Confusion and fear battled for dominance in my mind. "What? Why? What's going on?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "There's something in the house. Something evil. I heard it too." My blood ran cold. The whisper, the unease, my mom's terror, it all pointed to something far more sinister than I could have imagined. I grabbed her hand, and we started towards the front door. But as we reached the hallway, the lights flickered, and a cold gust of wind blew through the house, slamming the front door shut. We froze, staring at the door in horror. The temperature seemed to drop, and the once comforting aroma of lasagna was replaced by a foul, rancid smell. My mom clutched my hand tighter, her nails digging into my skin. "We have to find another way out," she said, her voice trembling. "The back door. Hurry!" We turned and ran towards the kitchen, but as we passed the living room, I glanced over my shoulder and saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Standing at the foot of the stairs was a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing a malevolent red. It was tall, its form shifting and flickering like a flame. It watched us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Don't look back," my mom said urgently, pulling me forward. "Just keep moving." We reached the kitchen and headed for the back door, but it too was locked, the key nowhere to be found. Panic set in, and I felt my chest tighten as I struggled to think of a way out. "The window," my mom said, pointing to the large kitchen window above the sink. "We can climb out." I nodded, and we hurried to the window. My mom tried to lift it, but it was stuck. She yanked at it with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me try," I said, stepping forward. I grabbed the edges of the window and pulled, using every ounce of strength I had. Slowly it began to give way, inch by agonizing inch. Behind us, the shadowy figure moved closer, its presence a suffocating blanket of dread. My mom kept glancing over her shoulder, her fear palpable. "Hurry, Jenna," she urged. "It's getting closer." With a final heave, I managed to push the window open wide enough for us to climb through. My mom went first, squeezing through the narrow gap and landing on the grass outside. I followed, my heart pounding in my ears. We ran to the neighbor's house, not stopping until we were safely inside. The neighbors, alarmed by our frantic state, called the police. When they arrived, they searched our house from top to bottom but found nothing unusual, no shadowy figure, no signs of forced entry, nothing to explain the terror we had experienced. In the days that followed, my mom and I stayed with relatives, too afraid to return to our home. We eventually sold the house, unable to shake the feeling that something malevolent still lingered within its walls. To this day, I don't know what we encountered that night. Whether it was a ghost, a demon, or some other supernatural entity, I can't say.